Hi, I'm Anna, and welcome back to the D1 Audible Cheat Sheets. Today, we're going to talk about the viticultural scenarios in Chapter 10, and I want to start with why this chapter exists in D1 and how it helps you score higher. Chapter 10 is where D1 stops being a list of options and becomes decision making. Up to now, you've learned tools: site selection, planting materials, canopy, nutrients, water, hazards, harvest. But in the real world, and in WSET exam questions, nobody asks, "What is VSP?" They ask you to explain why a region uses VSP, what problem it solves, what trade offs it creates, and how that flows through to style, quality, and price. So these scenarios are essentially model answers in disguise. Each one shows you how to build a coherent chain: growing environment, wine capacity or constraints, to viticultural choices, to ripeness, yield, health, to wine style and quality and cost or price. If students learn to talk in that chain, D1 becomes dramatically easier to retain and far easier to apply under exam pressure. So let's start with Priorat in Catalonia. Priorat is a study in heat, drought, poor soils, rugged terrain, and the choices are about survival, balance, and the reality that quality here is inherently expensive. The climate brings very hot, dry summers and cold winters. It's so hot that the best sites may face northeast to reduce exposure to the harshest afternoon sun. So, right away, site selection is used not to increase ripening, but to protect fruit and preserve balance. Soils are stony slate and quartz, low in organic matter, low nutrients, and free draining. With hot, dry conditions and high evapotranspiration, the vine struggles to access water. Irrigation exists, but it's constrained, permitted only with authorization, and typically just for vine survival or quality rather than farming for volume. Disease pressure is low because it's dry, but the core issue is water limitation. This natural limitation shapes everything: low vigor, small vines, low yields. Training reflects that. Many vineyards use bush wines. In this context, bush wines make sense because drooping shoots provide shade in intense sun, reducing sunburn risk, and the vines aren't so vigorous that canopy density becomes a disease trap. Vines are planted at low density, often 2,500 to 3,000 vines per hectare. So each vine has more soil volume to explore for scarce water and nutrients. And yields are extremely low, around 15 to 25 hectoliter per hectare, often driven further down by the prevalence of old wines. Variety choice matches the environment. Garnacha and Karenina are both late ripening and drought tolerant, which helps avoid sugars racing ahead in heat. Rootstock choice may also prioritize drought tolerance. Example 140R. Then terrain finishes the argument. Rugged landscapes plus often untrellised bush vines mean handwork is required, including harvest. Low yields plus high manual labor equals high cost base. That's why Priorat wines aren't building for inexpensive pricing. The viticulture practically forces premium to super premium economics. How to use this in exams? If you get a hot, dry region scenario, talk like Priorat. Water limited vine, so low vigor, so low density, plus bush vines, which gives low yields and requires hand labor, leading to higher cost and premium positioning. Now let's talk about Pauillac in Bordeaux. Pauillac is the opposite pressure set. Moderate temperatures, maritime rain risk, and an ongoing fight for consistent ripeness and healthy fruit. Bordeaux's proximity to the Atlantic moderates extremes. Moderate summers, mild winters, rainfall throughout the year. Pauillac soils are free draining and low nutrients, which helps limit vigor, useful in a wet climate where excessive canopy density would raise disease pressure. Variety is central here. Cabernet Sauvignon is medium to late ripening, so it can struggle in the coolest sites or vintages and can sometimes lack body and fruit breadth. Merlot becomes the strategic partner. Earlier ripening adds body and fruit and gives insurance in years when Cabernet is marginal. That's a classic Bordeaux risk management blend. Training and trellising. Vines are typically VSP trellised. On poor free draining soils, vines aren't hugely vigorous, so you don't need canopy splitting systems. VSP is enough to arrange the canopy for light interception, fruit exposure, and airflow, while also supporting disease management via better spray penetration and quicker drying. Because rainfall and humidity can drive disease pressure, producers monitor and prevent issues like downy mildew and botrytis, often relying on spraying as part of the annual cost structure. Planting density is high, often around 1 meter by 1 meter, approximately 10,000 vines per hectare. Competition isn't a problem because rainfall is adequate, the land is expensive. So, high density is one way to maximize economic return per hectare. Yields per hectare is typically around 50 to 60 hectoliter per hectare. But because there are so many vines, yield per vine is small, supporting fruit concentration and helping manage vigor. Mechanization is partly possible because of trellising, even with tight rows, using specialized straddle machines. Harvest can be hand or machine depending on producer and aims. How to use this in exams? In maritime regions, talk about rain risk, so disease pressure, which needs open canopy or VSP, which improves spray strategy, and blend for ripening reinsurance, leading to high density for land economics. Now, the Finger Lakes in New York. Finger Lakes is a scenario about cold climate limits, where lakes create viability, winter freeze shapes choices, and vigor management matters because soil and rainfall can push growth. The deep lakes provide crucial temperature moderation. Without them, Vitis vinifera won't reliably survive. Even so, summers are moderate and winters can be extremely cold. Site selection becomes a frost and ripening strategy. Black varieties such as Cabernet Franc are grown closest to the lakes to capture slightly warmer conditions and a longer ripening window, important for tannin and flavor maturity. Riesling is the flagship because it's relatively winter hardy and also late budding, which can reduce spring frost risk. But growers still protect the graft in winter with hilling up soil because the graft union is typically most vulnerable to winter freeze. Clonal choices matter here too. Multiple Riesling clones can give blending options to improve final quality or differentiate wines, useful in a region where vintage variation can be significant. Soils are nutrient rich and rainfall is plentiful, therefore, pushing vigor. To manage large canopies and improve light interception, canopy division systems like Scott Henry are used. Summer pruning, example leaf stripping, may also be needed to aid ripeness. Rainfall also drives fungal disease pressure, especially botrytis. A divided canopy helps airflow and drying, but fungicide spraying is often still necessary. Vine density is relatively low, approximately 2,800 to 3,200 vines per hectare, because big vines need space to avoid overlap. Rows are wider to permit mechanization because labor availability is low. Even with lower density, yields per hectare can still land around 50 to 60 hectoliter per hectare because each vine carries a larger crop. How to use this in exams? In cold climates, anchor moderation source, i.e., lakes. To winter freeze protection, hilling up. To variety choice, hardy late budding. To vigor management, canopy division. To disease risk, botrytis. To mechanization needs. And now, Central Valley, California. Central Valley is the clean, high volume economics case. The goal is maximum yield at lowest cost, and quality is defined by consistency and health rather than finesse. Warm, dry, sunny growing seasons plus permitted irrigation gives growers control over water supply. If nutrients are limiting, fertilizers can be applied. This makes it possible to grow large, high yielding vines, which supports the business model. Vines are costly to establish, so growers favor low density planting around 1,200 to 1,800 vines per hectare, with big vines carrying big crops. Yields can be around 180 to 200 hectoliter per hectare. Variety choice is driven less by what's optimal here and more by market demand and price per ton. Trellising is chosen for affordability and function. California sprawl is common. Cordon trained, spur pruned vines because replacement cane pruning needs more skilled labor, with shoots flopping over a single wire. It's cheap, and the drooping canopy helps shade fruit from intense afternoon sun, reducing sunburn risk. Some more complex systems, like lyre, may appear where vigor is extreme, but the overall theme is low intervention. Labor intensive practices like leaf pulling and especially green harvesting are generally avoided because they cost money and or reduce yields. This has quality consequences. Fewer passes through the vineyard and less vine by vine attention can lead to variable ripeness and therefore lower quality. Harvest is typically machine, often at night, where possible to keep fruit cool, reducing oxidation and microbial spoilage. But if there's huge volume to pick in a short time, not everything can be harvested under ideal conditions. And because the key commercial requirement is sound fruit, growers may pick relatively early to avoid rain risk as autumn approaches, especially if rot becomes a threat. How to use this in exams? In high volume regions, always link irrigation plus mechanization plus low density plus cheap trellis plus minimal passes equals higher yields, lower cost, variable ripeness risk, and inexpensive price point. And that concludes chapter 10 in the textbook. I do hope this helps with your prep, and I'll see you in the next episode.